Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm going to continue where I left off last time. Last time we were talking about the sovereignty of God. We decided we would focus on Joseph and started at Abraham. We didn't get to Joseph. Where we got to was the birth of Jacob and Esau, which was Matthew 24. So I want to, not Matthew, Genesis 24. So, a quick recap, just to keep us all within the concept of what we're discussing. We are looking at when God has intervened unusually. We're looking at his sovereignty. When he does things or agrees to things which we, of necessity, for our own reasons, find hard to understand. We struggle with them, but we have to lean into the reality that he knows everything. And because of that, while we struggle and have difficulties with them, we know that he's in charge and everything is going to work out all right. Having said that, there are some big things that we need to discuss. We know that Abraham had told his servant to get a son, a wife for his son, Isaac. We know that Rebekah agreed to marry Isaac and had left her family home to come to Canaan, a long distance, to marry Isaac. We know that these decisions happened after Sarah had died. So a lot is going on in the background. What we also will be told later in the story, but it's not relevant to us, so I'm only using it as passing, is that Abraham is going to remarry and have other children. But they're not relevant. Sounds terrible, but they're not. And because they're not relevant to our story, we set them to the side. Our focus today will be following the birth of the sons of Isaac. That's Jacob and Esau. Now, Jacob and Esau, well, let's say that they are a little problem all by themselves. Now, the problem is it started in the womb. Rebekah was barren. That's the first thing we need to know. Because she was barren, it became necessary for Isaac to intercede on her behalf and ask God to give her children. As far as we are aware, he only did this once, and she only had twins, 2 boys. Very unusual for a family of that day and age. So we have to understand, from Isaac's point of view, these 2 boys were going to inherit everything. But Rebekah was a prophetess. How do we know this? Because God spoke to her. And when God speaks to somebody, they become a prophet or a prophetess. Isaac also is a prophet, and so was aware of some of these things that his wife had experienced during her pregnancy. And what was the difficulty she had during her pregnancy? Well, she found out very quickly that there was going to be a major war between these 2 boys. They were going to wreck the place. They were a disaster. And God had already declared from the beginning, before they were born, I'm going to bless one and curse the other. I literally love one and hate the other. That's a terrible thing for a God to say, isn't it? But it's true. But he wasn't referring to Jacob and Esau. He was referring to what they would become, the generations that would descend from them. And that's ultimately what blessing and cursing is all about. And God is sovereign. And so he has already spoken about what is to happen, speaking about the end of a thing from its very beginning. So that's a very big thing to get our heads around. It's not a personal attack against the children, but what they would become and what they would represent. Just to make things a little more complex, the birth itself was traumatic, resulting in a problem. As one child was delivered, the second child was still holding on to his heel. From a legal standpoint, there was no separation of firstborn from secondborn. They were a continual process. Obviously, the midwife didn't see that. She said, well, he's out first and he's out second. And that's how they work it. But we also know a different story in the Bible where that didn't quite work out the way they planned either. In that story, there was a tread used, and the child with the tread ended up getting born second. But we'll forget about that, but that's not relevant. These two boys are as different as chalk and cheese. One is a hairy, outdoors man, coarse, rough, well suited to his environment, to the farming environment, loved by his father because he reminded him so much of his older brother, who he also was very fond of, and his father, Abraham, who was a nomad, traveling around in different places. Isaac, for all intent and purpose, hadn't really traveled around much. He did a bit, but not as much. He settled. But his two sons were so different. Jacob, on the other hand, well, he was a different type of boy. He was the sort of boy that liked staying about home. He was the type of boy that, you wouldn't send out into the fields to do your hard day's labour because he might not survive it. So his mother, she literally smothered him. But while we would say, okay, so there was a parental difference between these two as to favourites. They wouldn't have had favourites, of course not. Huh? Here's the reality. God's working in the background. The parents of these boys are prophet and prophetess. And God has already declared that he intends to bless and put his inheritance upon the younger of the two boys. So Rebecca is all for this. He's her favourite anyway. Isaac, on the other hand, prefers Esau, and there is a strife. Now, the Bible doesn't go into the strife. It simply bypasses it until we see the outcome. And it happens when Isaac's getting very old. And as he's getting old, he realizes, well, at some point in the future, I'm not going to be around. So it's time for me to pass some of the responsibilities I have on to my son. And one of these responsibilities was also to give him the blessing, the family blessing that had been bestowed upon him. He could now bestow upon his son. So it would continue on. But Isaac knew God's feelings about Esau. So when he told Esau what he was going to do and give him the blessing, when he sent him out to get a kid or to get game from the hunt so that his special meal could be prepared, his wife's listening. And she doesn't want this to happen. Right? We have to think about this. Rebecca is not about to just do something that is dubious. She's breaking all the protocols right across the board. But she feels that she's justified because she believes this is right with God. And that's the difference. She believes This is right with God, that God approves of this. So when Jacob kind of drops a wee hint and says, look, if this goes wrong, all the curses that are going to fall upon my life aren't worth it. They're not worth it. Why would I risk everything for this? And she says, look, son, don't you worry about it. There's things going on that you don't fully grasp yet, but you will later. Any curses that fall upon you will fall upon me instead. So that's an interesting concept, but it's not something that we would be unfamiliar with, where mothers would be willing literally to die for their children if they could. So they go ahead and they do a very elaborate deception to make Isaac believe that Jacob is Esau. They cover him in goat skin, around his hands, chest. He's got a beard already, so it didn't really matter. They got all of these clays and muds and rubbed it over his body so he'd smell like him. Basically awful. That's what you got to remember. And they prepared the perfect meal and sent it in. But you see, Isaac says, what? You're back with the meal already? God bless the hunt. Oh, okay. Come here over here a minute. And he touches him. Smells. And Isaac is saying to himself in his mind, everything about this person is Esau. He smells like him. He feels like him. The food's prepared like he'd have prepared it. The whole thing's right except for one small thing. He sounds like Jacob. He sounds like Jacob. The voice is different. But Isaac's going blind. He can't make out the difference in the true sense of the word. And he's willing to accept on face value that he's been told the truth. So he provides the blessing and he puts it on Jacob. And what a blessing. Literally everything. His brother would serve him. All nations would bow before him. Everything is given to him. The entire bounty of the earth is his. What a blessing. This is the sort of blessing, when you have that, you tell Donald Trump, go and sit in the corner and be quiet. I'm in charge. That sort of a blessing. So here's something you need to understand. When Isaac is settling after his big meal, Jacob has got himself out of the tent, and Esau comes in with a lovely prepared meal. Uh-oh. One, I'm too full to eat it, son. But more importantly, why are you feeding me twice? I haven't been here before. Well, somebody was, and that somebody got your blessing. What? You simply give it away? No, they got your blessing. And there's nothing I can do about it, because that blessing has now been agreed with God. And God is the one who's in charge of all of these things. And there's nothing we can do to change that. But you must have a wee blessing for me. Just a wee blessing. No? No wee blessing. Nothing at all. But he did give him something. He told him that he would always be at war. And he would always be a wild man. And he would always be fighting his brothers and neighbours and everyone else. But the question is, was that a blessing? Or was that a curse? Because that's what fell upon Esau. You might say, well, that was a terrible story. That was very mean. But it hadn't gone unnoticed that earlier in Genesis, there had been a wee incident that had happened. Esau was out in the field. He came back ravenous. So hungry, he was convinced that if he didn't get to eat something immediately, he wasn't going to survive. Now, the reality is, he should have known better. Realistically, he should have known better. That doesn't happen like that. But the reason he was putting it that way in such a dramatic fashion was because his brother had cooked a beautiful meal of lentils. And he loved Jacob's lentils. He knew these were the best. And he wanted them. So Jacob says, hang on a minute. What are you going to give me for them? What do you want? How about the birthright? I mean, it could be either of us anyway. That's the truth of the matter, because I'm still on your heels. I mean, why can it not be me as well as you? Aye, why not? You can have it. And for a bowl of lentils, he sold his birthright. So you see, what we initially saw as something that was very, very underhanded now has justification, because it had already been given to Jacob by his brother legally for a meal. And that is recorded throughout the Bible. What you say is important, and what you agree to can be held against you. So be careful as you go through life. Be careful. Problem was, Jacob had forgot most of that. He was pretty angry at, Esau was forgotten most of that, and he was pretty angry at Jacob. So he felt he could wait till his father died and then kill him. And he probably could have too. But Rebekah was also very concerned about this. But she had an idea. Let's send Jacob away. Now, given that this is her favorite son, she loves having him about, you have to ask, why would she have requested this? Now, immediately you might say, well, obviously because she thought he was going to get killed. But she also knows God has protected her son and is working with her son. So there has to be another reason. And the other reason is God needs Jacob to leave that area. Why? Well, you see, Jacob has a problem. Everything's done for him hand to foot. He doesn't know how to care for himself. He doesn't know what to do. He is unable to govern not just himself, but anybody else. And he needs to learn how to do that. And he has to learn how to trust God. But how do you trust God if you've never been in a position where you needed to? I mean, when he was hungry, his mummy would feed him. If his clothes were dirty, his mummy would have washed them. And that's the situation you had. Now, Esau, on the other hand, he'd always been out and about and around and all the rest, and he had learned the natural skills that he would need to survive, even if he couldn't cook lentils. That's only a dross to rub back. He could eat other things. But Rebekah's reason for sending him was, you know how hard our lives have been since Esau brought them to women. In other words, Esau had married wives from local tribes. And that was not what was being agreed. Rebekah knew that Abraham had said that Isaac was not to marry any of the local tribes. And that's how she had been brought all that distance to marry him. But one of her sons, who was initially thought to be the one who would inherit everything, had went out and broke that arrangement. Against his parents' wishes, he had married locally. Rebekah didn't want that to happen again. So she told Isaac to ensure this doesn't happen and this family gets cursed by God. He needs to be sent away to my brother Laban's house. Miles away. So on very short notice, Jacob has packed a small amount of what he needs and is told to go quickly. And he does. because he's still thinking that he's running away from his brother. He doesn't see the plan that is in place for his entire life. And he doesn't realize that his parents are now aware of it. What he does know is that he's tired, he's been walking all day, and that boulder would make a good pillow. So he puts his head on it and falls asleep. He has a strange dream. There where he is sleeping, he suddenly becomes aware there's a ladder. And as he's watching, up and down this ladder are all the angels of God, going up to report things to him, coming down to hand out blessings and interactions upon the whole earth. All done on this ladder. And he's going, wow, this must be the doorway to God, the portal. What he doesn't know is that he's just been shared with a vision. The vision is he's been shown a descendant that shall come from him, whose relationship with God will mean a freedom of movement between heaven and earth. That individual is Jesus Christ. But Jacob doesn't know him yet. What he does know is that this is a special place, and that the God that he's heard them all talk about has suddenly become very real to him. So he decides to enter into a pact with God. Now, this aspect of entering into a pact, I mean, you've got to take it as it sounds initially, but it actually involved the shedding of blood. You either took an animal or you provided some yourself. It depends on what your situation was. But the blood was the sacred oath. And so he made a pact. If you, and he's talking to God, the God of my father Isaac and the God of my grandfather Abraham, if you come with me, protect me, guide and look after me on my journey away, and then bring me safely back home again, then I will make you the only God I worship, and I will be loyal and faithful to you. There's a condition there. He's asking God to prove himself. He's not doing it intentionally because he actually needs the protection. And he knows that if God can do it and is willing to do it, he might require payment, and agreeing to be God's servant makes sense. I mean, his father was God's servant and his grandfather was God's servant. Why should he not be as well, if that's what it takes? From that moment on, things begin to change for Jacob. He's now on a different journey. He goes to his uncle, Laban, and Laban's quite happy to see him. Someone fresh, young, strong. I'll soon have him working out in the fields. No more mamping him. No, he's not going to get any more colour. He's going to be working hard. And it even turns out a little better for Laban, because one of Laban's daughters is rather attractive. Her name's Rachel. And Jacob takes a shine. So Laban and Jacob enter into a little agreement. If you're willing to work for me for 7 years, I'll give you Rachel in marriage. She'll be your wife. Well, no bother. If that's all it takes, because I've no dairy other than that. I might as well. So he works for his uncle 7 years. The day of the marriage comes. He's all excited. Everything's prepared. All the rest. He's been married off to the wrong sister. Because Rachel has a sister called Leah. An older sister, not quite the same looks as Rachel, you understand. The problem is, the custom of the day is that when you're married, you're married. So he's married to her. He's a bit annoyed. And he goes to Laban and he says, my agreement with you, my agreement was for Rachel. You've swindled me. He's a bit angry. He's a bit annoyed. Laban says, don't panic about it. You know the customs over here. You understand how things have to work. We couldn't have the youngest daughter married before the oldest daughter. But sure, that's all right. Why don't you marry Rachel next week? It'll only be another 7 years of working for me. So Jacob agrees. And after the next week, he marries Rachel. So in 2 weeks, he ends up with 2 wives. One he's paid for in full, and the other he wants, so is willing to pay for in full again. So for 14 years, he works for his uncle on minimum rations, where he's not getting paid. He's only getting what he needs to eat. His wives, the daughters, have maidservants given them as wedding presents. But again, their father's not caring for them, and he's not looking after them. That's Jacob's job. So Jacob has a lot of learning to do. He's got a lot of arranging things to do. And he hasn't been able to care or look after his family for 14 years. Not properly. So it's been a hard struggle those first 14 years. So afterwards he goes to Laban and he says, look, I've paid my debt. It's time for me to go. Oh, no. Tell me what you want to be paid. Because, since you've been around, things have went very well. And they had been, because God had blessed Laban's entire household for Jacob. Everything went well. Tell me what your wages are. I'll agree to them. Just keep working for me for another while. We'll let you talk about going home another time. For another 6 years, Jacob works for Laban. Initially he says, look, I'll take the spotted sheep and goats. Any spotted sheep, goats will be mine, and any ordinary ones will be yours. No problem. There's hardly ever spotted sheep or goats when you're breeding purebreds, and they're all of one type. But Laban doesn't know how God works. And this is where sometimes we're told that Jacob's a little crafty here, but he's not. He's following orders. Because I assure you, as any sheep or goat farmer could tell you, no matter where they came from, it doesn't matter if you stick branches or different things in front of the feeding troughs and where they mate to automatically get different coloured animals. It doesn't work. They've been doing it for centuries, and it doesn't work. But it did for Jacob, because God made it work. This is a miraculous miracle that was being going on. And over that period, over the 6 years, Laban realized that Jacob was actually being blessed more than he was now. That the blessing had changed from the household to his family in particular. In other words, when he agreed spotted, all the sheep started getting to be spotted. The best quality ones, the healthy ones. Anything else that was unhealthy remained as it was and made it far. Economy was going down for Laban. His sons were ripping because they wanted to inherit big amount. And at this turn, this cousin was going to end up with everything. So Laban changed the wages. Striped ones this time. Different ones the next time. Ones that have this colouring. Ones that have that colouring. He did it a total of 10 times. But it didn't matter what he changed Jacob's wages to. That's the breed that the animals became. That's the colouring. That's how they all became born. Because God was working to bless. Then one day God said, it's time to go home. So Jacob called his 2 wives, who by now had increased to 4 wives, because he ended up having been given in marriage the maidservants as well. So he now has 4 wives to keep. And a total of 12 boys and 1 girl. 13 children. So he's a bit, well, actually, it would have been still 12 children at that time, because Benjamin hadn't been born yet. He'll be born later. And it's important to understand that. But when he calls these wives together, he only calls 2 of them. And that is Rachel and Leah. And he says to them, look, you know what has happened over the last 20 years. You're aware of how your dad has changed my wages 10 times. You're aware that if we don't leave, he will take back everything that we have worked and have here. Is there any reason that you find a problem with us? Now, what he was really saying to them is, I have to go. I'm taking what I need with me. Are you willing to come with me or not? That's what he was asking them. He was giving them the freedom of choice. And do you know what they answered him? Our father sold us to you. We're your property, your responsibility. We know that our father has cheated you as many ways as he can. We agree with you. Let's go. These are often considered to be the most difficult struggles that Jacob had experienced up to that point. And they were very great struggles. He was about to enter a period of more struggle when he separated from Laban. Because on the birth of Benjamin, his life fell apart. Because Benjamin's mommy was Rachel. And she died during the childbirth. She had named him Benji, but he had changed it to Benjamin because one was trouble and the other was blessing. And so he made that decision after she died. And he had buried her on the journey away. But when he had come and settled finally, he also was worried about how his brother would take all this. And guess what? He didn't trust God. How do we know? Because he went and he made preparation all along the line because he was worried about what his brother might do. But God already had it dealt with. He had removed the concerns. And Isaac had realized that his life had actually turned out a lot better when Jacob left. He hadn't been affected by any of these blessings and curses anyway. And everything was going well. And that kept him happy. He had everything he wanted. All these things would happen later. But Jacob was back. He still decided to separate away from his brother. He never saw his mother again. It's not recorded in Scripture, so that's why we say that. He got to go to his father's funeral, which happened a little while later. And he settled down to rear his family. And that's where the story changes. Now we're getting ready to look at the story of a different son, Joseph. Problem is, have we just run out of time again? I guess this is going to be part 3 next time. Thank you.